Okay, well, I was going to say welcome back, but I guess I'm back, so I don't want to welcome myself. But anyway, I don't have the other mic. We have a camera mic, but we don't have a normal mic, so hopefully you can hear me back there, okay? If not, just go like this and I'll get the message. So tonight we're looking at autoimmune conditions. And this is something that may be a little bit of a consternation to some people because, how is it that the body can turn on itself, right? I mean, it just doesn't seem to be sort of designed that way, right? And you're right, we were never designed that way. We were designed to live healthy, perfect lives for eternity. And but I'll go over tonight some of the reasons why. I won't be able to cover all the autoimmune diseases, because as you're probably aware, there's quite a few of them, right? And this is just a few of those conditions, right? Most common condition for autoimmune is arthritis, and then we have also Hashimoto's, which is a hypothyroid issue. And so this is something that is very, very common. Welcome. And so I'll be covering tonight some of the causes of these autoimmune-related conditions and what we can do naturally to help combat that, okay? So, what perturbs the system? Why is it that the body ends up fighting against itself? They've done studies on people who are sedentary, and they found that they actually have a higher level of autoimmune disease than people who are active. So, about 40 years ago, 75% of people have had jobs that actually required movement, right? Exercise. Whereas now it's the opposite. We have 75% behind a computer screen, and this is increase in inflammation. And it's like a car that sits idle, right? It blows out all this smoke, and that has a compromising effect on the immune system, and then also the circulatory system. So perfect health depends on perfect circulation. And so the way the body heals is always the same. It's through the blood. The life is in the blood. And that's how any wound is healed. That's how even cancer is healed, and ulcers are healed, and bones are healed. They're all healed through the blood supply. So the primary principle in the recovery of sickness is to accelerate blood flow, and at least to not obstruct blood flow, which means clean arteries, means low sugar levels, right? It means there's no arterial plaque buildup. There is no increased viscosity, such as dehydration. When you don't drink enough water, your blood gets thicker and circulation is impaired. When you lower your exercise level, circulation is affected, right? And so when the blood slows down, guess what happens? More inflammation occurs as a natural consequence, right? So one of the biggest causes of prostate issues today is men sitting down too long. And you have this stasis situation where the blood supply is not moving in the pelvic cavity. And so you have inflammatory byproducts that build up, and there's little sphincters, little doors that close in the vasculature and the capillary beds that cause the blood to just stay put. And because the blood's not moving, it actually creates inflammatory products that causes the cells to change. Okay, cells don't have many options. They can get bigger, they can die, they can duplicate themselves, they can shrink, but many of them suffer as a result of this inflammation in the body. All right, so brain workers actually have a far greater risk of having inflammation than people who are mobile. All right, so, and also people have more fat on their belly, or in the midriff. They're going to have also more inflammation, because the more fat you have, the more insulation you have, and it increases the body's core temperature. And so it may only be a small amount, it may only be 1 degree Fahrenheit, it goes up, but that is enough to push it in a more inflammatory state. And so they've done MRI scans on this, and they found that the higher the fat level, the more the inflammation is promoted around the body. And so this goes for all kinds of conditions as well, especially diabetes. If you lose 1 pound of fat, you decrease your risk of diabetes by 2%. Just 1 pound, right? That's pretty significant. All right, so raiding the fridge late at night is a good way to increase body weight. My wife used to be 220 pounds. I don't think she minds me saying this, but you've probably seen my wife. She stayed about 140 since we've been married, basically. But it was a couple of years before we married. She was 220 pounds, and she just made one change, real simple change. She cut out a meal at night, and she lost 80 pounds in 6 months. Because that's when your body is putting on weight at night, right? You don't need the calories at night, so the body stores it, and this is why most Americans don't want to eat breakfast, because their body is still processing from the night before. The meal is still in there, and I don't know about you, but if I have a late meal, heavy meal, and I go to bed and there's food in my stomach, I'll feel it the next day. And when I wake up, I feel there's food in my stomach. I don't want to even eat breakfast if I have too much to eat at night. If you're out of sync with your body's natural rhythm, the body's clock is basically synchronized to the sunlight. So we have a 24-hour cycle, and if you move overseas, you go somewhere there's a different time zone, your body will resynchronize based on the light from the sun. All right, so we don't become nocturnal. And so the body's hormones are synchronized on this 24-hour clock. And the more you put your body out of synchronization with natural rhythms, so you go to bed late, you get up late, you eat at any time of the day, that type of thing, the more you do that, the more you create a condition to push autoimmune diseases into play. And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes some time. Okay, so this circadian rhythm, as I mentioned before about eating late and sleeping late, also people who work more than 10 hours a day, especially on their feet, they have a much greater increase of autoimmune diseases, heart diseases, also depression, hypothyroidism, all kinds of things. So sleep loss is associated with increased inflammation and autoimmune diseases, right? Now, 5% of people can thrive off of 6 hours of sleep or less a night. Okay, 5% of people. But the vast majority of people, now I'm not talking about children and even teenagers, but adults, we need at least 7 to 8 hours sleep. In fact, longevity studies show the optimum time to be asleep is 7 hours. Now, it depends on how deep your sleep is as well. Some people sleep really deeply, 7 hours. Others sleep fairly lightly for 8 hours. So the 7 hours can do much better than someone with 8 hours. In fact, if you sleep 9 hours, you can triple your risk of diabetes. You can increase your risk of heart disease. Okay, so it's a good idea to try to work on getting that 7 hours of sleep, because it will set your body up so that you'll have less inflammation in the body. You'll also be able to think better. I deal with a lot of nurses, and I've probably had hundreds of consultations with nurses. And I tell them, you tell me how long you've been a nurse, I'll tell you what diseases you have, because it's very, very consistent. Well, you see it time and time again play out, because they also have an irregular schedule. And they hardly drink water. And they're all day on their feet, and they have late nights, night shift many times. It sounds like STEM. That's right. You tell me how long you've been a parent, and I'll tell you what conditions you have. So, emotional stress or job burnout provokes inflammation, increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease and autoimmune diseases. Okay. Now, 100 years ago, we didn't have the autoimmune diseases. Did you know that? Someone could work all day in their farm and still not get autoimmune disease, right? And now it's almost, it's everywhere. I hardly meet a person that doesn't have some type of autoimmune condition. It's very, very common, especially in ladies, especially in their 40s and 50s. When they go through menopause, this is often the time where these things start to happen. Emotional stress has a big impact on triggering inflammation as well. All right, the stress response causes that cortisol to elevate. Now, cortisol can elevate without damaging you, but if it's activated by stress, then it invokes the inflammation response. All right, now inflammation is a two-edged sword. It's helping you in a way because it's actually calling the body's attention to a specific area of the body that needs autoimmune, it needs white blood cells to come in and clean up the mess. At the same time, when that continues over and over again, it's like, you know, having a crime. Let's say there was a crime in this city, and all the police officers come, and the bad guys get arrested, but then they call in more and more of their bad guys, and over time the police could get overwhelmed if there's too many bad guys. God forbid that happen. But you get the point. If that continues too long, that's the danger, right? So we need inflammation in a sense because it calls the white blood cells into the area to help clean up the mess. But if that is continuing for months and years, that is when there's a suppression of the immune system, right? It's like keeping those police officers 24/7 going for several months. They finally say, give us a break. We're going to have to retire early, right? So this happens in the body with the immune cells. They can only cope with so much before they start to quit or they get killed because the bacteria take over, the swelling increases, the blood supply is restricted. Okay, could I have 12,000 units of antioxidants with that fried chicken and large fries? Okay, so this is what we call oxidative stress, right? If you're spending a lot of time under the golden arches, you're going to need high levels of antioxidants to combat the oxidative stress that's going to trigger the inflammation that's going to cause autoimmune conditions to happen, okay? So this is what you need to be aware of, that these foods, right, have you ever got some French fries from a store and try this out. You go and buy some French fries and put them in the cupboard and come back a year later and they look the same. Now to get life, to get death, you have to have life to begin with, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Something has to be living in order to die. But if it's already dead, then, it doesn't change, right? So it stays dead. So you get a potato and you put it in the cupboard, it's not going to last for a year. But, so there's chemicals that are actually preserving that, we call it food, but it's not food, right? And so it shows us there was no life to begin with. And many of the foods that people are commonly eating don't even make the definition of food. Because a food doesn't just have to have caloric value, it has to have nutritional value. And a lot of what we categorize as foods does not have any nutrition whatsoever. It's actually depleting your nutrition. That's why Americans are the most abundant in food. As far as caloric intake, we are pretty much on the top of the list, but we're also the most malnourished of any nation in the world. All right, so, condiments can also increase your risk of inflammation and autoimmune. Too much salt can also do it. Now, not all salt is created equal. So, we use salt, but we use Himalayan salt, pink salt, we rarely ever, the salt that you buy in the store, in fact, we never buy it, it's sodium chloride. So and they use aluminum in there as well. And it's just basically two minerals in there. And that stuff causes inflammation over time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It also increases your risk of hardening your arteries. Peppers also, be careful about too many like chili peppers and things like that. Caffeine is another one. All right, I'm going to stand on some people's toes here, but caffeine can accelerate inflammation by 300, 600%, depending on how much coffee you take. Caffeine is addictive, right? It's actually categorized as a drug. We always get addicted to things our body doesn't need, right? You can never get enough of what you don't need, because what you don't need never meets your need, right? So we get addicted to sugar, right? Refined sugars, and we get addicted to coffee and MSG and all these things. We don't get addicted to apples or broccoli or tofu, right? It doesn't cause those cravings. And food manufacturers realize that in order to make you a repeat customer, they have to spice things up. They have to flavor it up. And often these flavoring enhancers cause you to come back for more. They hit you up with dopamine, and then they throw off a cliff at the end of the day.
Cytotoxins?
Yeah, cytotoxins definitely can do that. MSG, things like that. Alcohol consumption increases your body inflammation. And this particularly can also cause problems with the lungs and the vasculature. Also, cigarette smoking increases the body's inflammation. And I don't know how they can make cigarettes even more toxic than they are. There's about 3,000 chemicals in a cigarette. And they don't need 3,000 chemicals. There's some chemicals in there that they know it's more addictive to the human body than any other chemicals. Like you ask someone who's quit smoking how hard it is to quit smoking. It's the hardest thing of all addictive substances. The hardest thing to give up, even more than heroin, is tobacco. Mm-hmm. All right, and I've given stop smoking seminars, and you see what people go through. They really suffer. I tell people, just keep yourself distracted, because you'll have a temptation to smoke, and it will last about 10 minutes. Just make it through that 10 minutes, right? And after 2 days, the tobacco will actually be out, the nicotine will be out of your bloodstream. And after that, it's psychological addiction. It's not chemical addiction. All right, so your risk of acquiring autoimmune diseases goes up tremendously based on coffee, alcohol, and tobacco, 3 social drugs. All right, mold is another one. There's about 1 in 4 houses in America that have mold in them. And mold is basically a toxin in the bloodstream, and it can reside in the body for many years, and it can cause all kinds of autoimmune problems. And it's very hard on the lungs, and it's very hard on the immune system. So this is something, and it goes to the joints as well. So a lot of people have rheumatoid that could be attributed to their living condition, right? So the best way to deal with mold is, you have to basically strip it. If it's in your basement, you have to strip it. You can use things like vinegar, baking soda. You can use bleach, even though I'm not a fan of bleach, but it does work. And then just keep that basement, just get some air flowing through there, because that mold will end up in your walls. And once the mold ends up in the walls, it's a lot harder to get out. And it's much easier to breathe in. And I can't tell you how many people I've met who are suffering because of the mold situation in their home. So keep the debris away from your house, rotting material, even leaves and low-lying water, things like that. They can be problematic. Aflatoxins, right? These are problems. They used to have a bit of aflatoxin scares in peanuts. Sometimes they would eradicate particular peanut butter from the store, but aflatoxins are not just in peanuts, they're in a number of processed foods. And also, you see here cheese, wine, vinegar, any food that was created by fermentation, right? People say to me often, whoa, well, what about apple cider vinegar? Can we have apple cider vinegar? Isn't that going to be good for us? Do you know how they make apple cider vinegar?
Rotten.
They get rotten apples, and they're cheap because no one will buy them, and then they press them, and they end up in this big vat, and they add acetic bacteria to it. It's converted to acetic acid, and it's so strong in acidity they have to actually dilute it 90% because the pH would be too strong. So it becomes alcohol in the first place, and then it becomes vinegar after that. Acetic acid is basically twice fermented, right? And that ends up in your bloodstream. It can do a lot of damage over time. It's not like once you do this and then you're dead type of thing. It's like for years and years. I grew up almost drinking vinegar. I grew up in England. We used to have fish and chips and put your vinegar on there. And now we use lemon juice. That's God's vinegar. Lemon juice. I love lemon juice. It's a great replacement, or lime, lemon or lime, and it's very good for your health. Yes, oil and vinegar can be a problem, especially refined oils. All right, so a lot of people use this. They use lemon with olive oil as a flush. Probably heard of that, to try to get rid of gallstones or kidney stones. And they often drink large amounts, like a cup of oil, and then it actually creates little globules that come out, and you think you actually got rid of the gallstones or kidney stones, but actually you created it in the first place because of the high amount of oil. It used a lot of cholesterol to emulsify that, and it caused these balls to form. And it comes out, and you think you got cleansed, but it's actually... Now, I'm not against olive oil, I'm not against lemon juice, but if you took large amounts, you may be under the impression that it's helping you, but it's not. There's a lot of chemicals in processed foods, pickles, and salty foods. Fried potatoes, salty snacks, desserts, and processed meats are among the top instigators of elevated oxidative stress and whole body inflammation, right? So, think about it. You get a potato, you slice it up, and you put it in this deep vat of genetically modified canola oil, which is reheated about 30 times a week. And then that's given to you, and you put that in your stomach, and it creates all this oxidation. So in order to protect yourself against this oxidation, your body has to use antioxidants. And if you're low in antioxidants, it creates more cell death, and it creates more inflammation and more autoimmune diseases. And so then you end up having problems with, your heart can start malfunctioning. You could end up having some digestive issues, right? So, or immune suppression. The digestive system is very closely connected with the immune system. In fact, 80% of your immune system is developed in the gut, and you have a lot of microbiome down there, and the microbiome, they communicate with the immune system, right? And they can actually tell your body, they can even tell your brain through the vagus nerve, they can set you up for addictions if they're unhealthy. They will give you cravings. If they are healthy, they will give you the desire for healthy foods. So everyone's microbiome is different, and that's why that's why we have dispositions for different diseases, right? We can be genetically primed, but also our lifestyle determines that as well. And so if you eat a lot of junky foods or malnourished foods, then the microbiome will communicate with the brain that you should eat this particular food, and it will set up strong cravings, and it will lower your dopamine levels until you take that food to satisfy that need. But it's an unnatural craving that's been stimulated through perpetual bad habits.
Like chocolate.
Yeah, like I used to eat bar of chocolate every day. If I didn't eat chocolate, I'd be irritable. I'd be craving. My mood would change. I'd get depression. All right, it's all because my body is telling my brain, you need to get some dopamine fix. You get some chocolate. Okay. And then you convince yourself it's not too bad. You know, it's got some zinc in it. You know, it's got some calcium in it.
It's got peanuts in it.
It's got some peanuts in there. Yeah, that's all good. High fructose. This is another problem. High fructose, and you know, we saw this in diabetes. When high fructose came in, it actually came in the 1970s, and farmers were actually creating or planting this corn. It's called dent corn, and it's not a corn that you can eat really. It's not very sweet. It's not like your typical sweet corn. It's very dry, and they give it to farm animals, and they can convert it into flour. And then through refining process, they can transfer it to high fructose corn syrup. And the problem with high fructose corn syrup is the body doesn't register it as a calorie, and your liver can only metabolize about 25 grams a day of this fructose. And once you go past that limit, then high fructose actually sabotages liver function. It creates problems with the arteries. It can cause hyperlipidemia, and it can start affecting blood sugar levels. And so fructose, high fructose corn syrup, has about 20 different names they disguise it in processed foods. And it's in, I'd say probably 70% of processed foods, high fructose corn syrup is in there. So just pay attention to the labels, okay, because this creates an inflammation overload. Okay, so what about things like whole bread, right? The amount of magnesium in foods has decreased by 19% in the last 20 years. And we have low levels of other minerals like zinc, selenium, and magnesium. And this increases your risk of inflammation. So suppression in certain minerals your body needs that we're not getting from the soil will elevate your risk of inflammation. And look at this, whole wheat flour has 530% more magnesium, 320% more zinc, and 110% more selenium than white flour. All right, the whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead, right? Okay, so fiber and magnesium deficiency are associated with a 300 to 400% elevation in inflammation. Okay, so this is significant. 300 to 400% inflammation. You know, the average American has a bowel movement every 2 to 3 days. If you're on 3 meals a day, you should be having 3 bowel movements every day. So what happened? Why isn't it getting out? We're having 10% of the fiber that our body needs. And fiber is not just a broom. It helps with nutrient absorption. It helps with the microbiome. It also helps in slowing the transit of sugar into the body. It gives you a feeling of satiation. So if you're low in fiber, it will dramatically impact your bowel. And if that food doesn't get out, if that whatever you ate didn't get out in time, then a portion of that ends up getting broken down. It ends up back in your portal vein of your liver, and it gets put back in your bloodstream, and you wonder why you get a headache. You know, so go to the bathroom, eat high fiber foods, drink lots of water, get lots of, especially walking after a meal, that helps with elimination, because your bowels are suspended on tendons and they just bounce up and down. After a meal, that's the prime time to go for a walk. It increases peristalsis and increases evacuation. So here's some dietary choices here that will increase your autoimmune diseases. Now, all of these I'm showing you up here. I didn't just pluck them out of my head. There's clinical studies underneath. If you want the presentation, you can read the clinical studies on here. They're all documented, showing, because they've done a lot of studies in what I'm sharing with food and creating your elevated risk in autoimmune diseases. And so the more sugar people had, the more cholesterol was elevated, more eggs, saturated fat, animal fat, and soft drinks. Vegetable fat really didn't elevate significantly at all, but these other ones do tremendously increase. Now, I will touch on oil briefly. I'll just share this with you. Not all oil is created equal, and most oil that you find in the store is a hybridization of different oils. And yes, there are some olive oil. If it's true olive oil, it should have a green color. It will not be completely clear. If you hold it up to the light, you'll see tiny little sedimentation in there, and it won't be clear. It will have some greenish tinge and some sedimentation in there. So that's from cold press, the olive oil, right? Without refining. When you use heat, as they do with cooking oils, that's when you get the unsaturated fat becomes saturated fat. And especially becomes dangerous once you start frying that stuff. And this will increase the weight, it will increase lipid peroxidation, and this will cause more inflammation and more autoimmune diseases. Especially trans fats, it'll say on the packet 0 trans fats per serving. Have you noticed that? 0 trans fats per serving is a way they can get under the radar, because technically if you have less than a gram of trans fats per serving, then it's, according to the label laws, 0 trans fats. But the reality is it could be full of trans fats. They just decrease the serving size in proportion to the gram of trans fats, so it gives you the impression there's no trans fats. So I would say if it's fried, leave it alone. It's got trans fats in there, okay? Oxidized cholesterol promotes tissue inflammation and cell death, leading to atherosclerosis, inflammatory heart disease, and autoimmune inflammatory disease. These are basic things that people should be taught at school. We're not taught these things growing up, and we fall into the habit of just, I used to eat a bucket of ice cream, just one go, all the oxidative stress. I never ate one healthy meal in the first 20 years of my life. All right, I was a junk food addict. I just loved junk food. I loved ice cream. I still eat ice cream. I had some banana ice cream the other day, homemade. You just put frozen ice cream through the Champion juicer, and it came out beautiful ice cream. What's that?
You said frozen ice cream.
Frozen bananas, sorry. Did I say frozen ice cream? Yeah, just for those, just to qualify, ice cream is frozen. Yeah, but it was really nice. Sorry about that. I'm speaking ahead of my brain sometimes. Okay, so cheese. Cheese has a lot of bacteria. In fact, per cubic millimeter of cheese, you have around 2 million bacteria. 2 million bacteria per cubic millimeter of cheese, okay? So it takes about 10 liters of milk to make 1 liter of cheese. And if you've ever been to where they get the milk from the cows, you'll probably never drink milk again or have cheese again. I've been there. It's a lot of bacteria, a lot of pus comes out of the cows. They inject them with penicillin and growth hormones sometimes. We call them recombinant bovine growth hormone, which accelerates cancer development, and it affects the hormones. So definitely I would avoid this. Make your own cheese. My wife makes a great cheese out of cashews with pimentos and lemon juice and salt. It's fantastic. No oxidative stress in there. You just need to know how to replace these things with wholesome choices, right? Eating the same foods day after day overwhelms the body's food tolerance mechanism and can result in food allergies, also known as autoimmune diseases. right? That can even go for good things. Like if you eat oatmeal day after day after day and year after year after year, your body could end up having develop a reaction to the oatmeal, right? It's a bit like having your in-laws with you 24/7. You need a break sometimes. So yeah, I mean, when I was in Australia, I remember this lady, she ate 20 mangoes. 20 mangoes. Now, Australia has really good mangoes, and I don't blame her for eating 20 mangoes, although I wouldn't eat 20 mangoes at one meal. But anyway, she had a reaction to mangoes after that because she ate so many of them. So if you eat too much of one thing, or if you eat something day after day after day, you could end up with developing an autoimmune reaction to it.
Anything?
It can potentially be anything, but there are some things that are safer than others. For example, rice. If you go to a lot of third world countries, they eat rice every meal. I was in the Philippines, every meal is rice. And no one develops an autoimmune reaction to those things. But it's more with processed foods. But if you eat something that is in too abundance, too frequency, then you can, even if it's healthy food, you can develop that. I mean, anyone can potentially, it doesn't guarantee it, but it increases your likelihood to it. All right, and then, okay, so excessive antigenic load as encountered in a meal comprised of multiple diverse foods can provoke autoimmunity, allergy, and inflammation. Now, this reminds me of when I went to Japan. I lived in Japan for 2 years, and Japanese men in particular, they have the highest incidence of stomach cancer in the world. And you know, this led me on to search, why does Japanese men have, and a lot of women as well, but particularly men, why do they have an increased risk of stomach cancer? Well, in Japan, they have a saying that you need to eat about 200 different varieties of food per day in order to be healthy. And often they combine that in one meal. And so you got all these different foods. I remember I was invited to a retreat one time, and we have our own table, like 2 people per table, and they bring out, there's 28 plates of food on the table. And they're all different sizes. Some are quite small and some others are quite big. And they put all this together. So you've got all this variety in one meal.
Sounds like a
in the stomach. Sounds like a potluck. Okay, yeah. And this is not good for the stomach, and it can create inflammation and autoimmune diseases, and especially stomach cancer is a big one. Gluten is another situation that you need to be aware about, because gluten is high in gliadin. It's the protein content of the wheat, and they've genetically modified wheat, and so there's a different number of chromosomes in the wheat than was originally put in there, and so this can create a problem with the intestinal villi. And because the gluten or the gliadin, it docks into the intestinal villi receptors, and it allows them to relax and open up and allow undigested food straight into the bloodstream without being broken down into its proper constituents. And that can set you up for autoimmune disease. Also, if you start a child, a baby, on food too quickly, you can set them up for autoimmune diseases very easily. Mother's milk doesn't just extend, for the first 3 to 6 months. In fact, it's no problem. Mothers used to breastfeed for up to 2 years, right? That was a generation or two ago. Yeah, you did? Okay, good on you. Okay, so look at this. Okay, this relates to the percentage of the diet as meat, and you'll find that there is a direct connection with the amount of meat eaten per day and the prevalence of rheumatoid arthritis. Now, meat often has what we call arachidonic acid. Now, in the body, it converts to prostaglandin A2, which is a vasoconstrictor, and it causes the blood vessels to tighten, okay? And so it constricts the blood vessels, which constricts circulation. Now there is a chemical that you can take that can have the opposite effect. We call it nitric oxide. And you can get that from beets. Beets have one of the highest amounts of nitric oxide, and when you take that in, it dilates. Okay, now don't eat the beets with the meat thinking they'll offset everything. It doesn't quite work that way. But if you've been eating a lot of meat, then I would strongly suggest you have a lot of nitric oxide, because that's going to help your blood vessels. And here's another thing you can do for autoimmune diseases. Is called intermittent fasting. Now we have in the blood vessels, we have these little, what we call mast cells. They're part of the immune system, and what they do is they clean up plaque and debris inside the blood vessels. They eat it up. And you know what activates them? Fasting. When you skip a meal, I'm not talking about going 7 days with just water or anything. Most Americans skip a meal anyway. They just eat their breakfast the night before, right? So if you have it in the morning, that's why we call it breakfast, because you're breaking a fast, right? And you're fasting through the night. So when you do that, then these mast cells come out and they start to engulf the plaque buildup inside the blood vessels. Okay, thus reducing the obstruction, increasing blood flow, and reducing inflammation. All right, so there is a direct connection, as I mentioned before, with animal products with autoimmune inflammatory diseases, especially meats. Okay, red meats in particular are very susceptible for the body to be set up for oxidative stress. Consumption of red meat increases risk of autoimmune inflammatory disease by 130%. Now, it does depend on the quality of the meat. Okay, so if the animal was fed grain, like GMO corn, which most cattle are fed nowadays, then it will increase the risk. But if they're fed on grass, then that number will definitely decrease. All right, so food poisoning. There are numerous infectious agents such as salmonella, E. coli, streptococci, mycobacterium have been linked to autoimmune inflammatory diseases. The most abundant source of these infectious diseases or agents is animal products. Now, there may be someone here thinking, well, aren't greens also increasing these problems like E. coli? You may have seen on some of the news reports that like spinach has high amounts of E. coli. And do you know where that came from? It was actually the animal manure. It was the spill-off that goes on the greens. So be careful, wash your greens before you eat them. Animal manure is fine if it's a healthy animal. Okay, this is another problem. Do you know what this is? This is a parasite found in pork. And it's in about 70% of pigs. And it goes to the frontal lobe. And your frontal lobe can start to atrophy through these worms. Okay, you'll be amazed. I don't want to gross anyone out, but there's a lot of parasites that stay in our intestinal system for several years before they die, and they can start feeding on the body's natural nutrition. So if you've got digestive issues, maybe you're losing weight or something's wrong and you're not sure and your diet's pretty good, think about parasites. Yes?
So I heard that these worms in the body can also gather around the joints, and people think they have arthritis, but it's actually parasites in the joints.
Yeah, some parasites, they can go all over the body. They're not isolated. Some of them isolate to the GI tract, like tapeworms, for example. They hook onto the small intestine, and they can grow several meters long. And they're just sitting by the highway, just sucking up your B vitamins and everything. And you know, I had a lady in Maine, a friend of mine actually. Anyway, it gets a bit. I don't want to be too graphic here, but let's say this worm was pretty huge, like a snake came out of it. Yeah. So she wanted me to see it, take pictures, but that goes beyond my call of duty. Yeah. But yeah, if you've been around animals, you got animals in your house, or you're around fecal matter, or you've been in third world countries, chances are you've got some parasites.
Well, how does the doctor recognize it?
Do a stool sample test. Do a stool test, and they'll look under the microscope, and they'll screen for the most common ones. There are some they may not be able to pick up. There are a lot of worms in other countries that aren't actually screened for, but generally they can pick up if there's a problem there.
And a treatment for?
Okay, so you're going to need some bitter herbs, bitter things like wormwood, clove, black walnut, papaya seeds. Yeah, they help flush out parasites. Yeah, parasites do not like bitter alkaloids. They just apricot seed. Yeah, the only problem with apricot seed is that it's got cyanide in it. Yeah, so you can't take more than about 5 apricot seeds because of the high cyanide content. But yeah, anything bitter, they hate bitter stuff. And you need to take it for about, what's that?
You can get a cleanse for that.
Yes, now here's what I would suggest. Take wormwood with clove, black walnut, and papaya seeds. You don't necessarily need papaya seeds, but those 3, it will kill the adult, the larvae, and the eggs. Because sometimes you can kill the adult and you still have the eggs that hatch, and they're resistant. So if you take those 3, you will get rid of all of them.
Wormwood, clove, and what?
Clove, black walnut, and the other one is wormwood. Wormwood's fruit. You take it for 4 weeks. 4 weeks. 4 weeks will get rid of everything. At least once a day. Yeah. Yeah. Then we had food additives. Okay. Food additives can be problematic for inflammation. How are we going for? How much time do I have left here?
Keep going. How long is your presentation?
Okay. Well, I got about 200 slides, so I can go as long as you want, but let me.
Maybe
10 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay, I'll try to go faster here. Okay. So, if you have low stomach acid, you have more chance of inflammation and autoimmune. Now, a lot of people get heartburn and they think there's too much acid. This is actually the opposite. You have not enough acid. And when you don't have enough acid in the stomach, then your pH goes up. When it goes above 3, it affects the calcium ions that cause constriction on the esophageal sphincter, and it relaxes the esophageal sphincter and allows food to go up there, even though it's acidic and it feels like it's burning. It's caused through lack of acidity. So you have heartburn and everything, and you think the best answer is to take an antacid from the doctor. Well, it's the worst thing you can do. It will temporarily, for a few minutes, relieve a symptom, but then it will shut down acid even more. So you want to take bitter things to improve hydrochloric acid. And be regular, and don't snack, and don't eat between meals. This will help. Eating excessive intake of food. I couldn't believe this when I came across this information, but it said for Thanksgiving, and I'm all a fan of Thanksgiving. I believe it's a day we want to celebrate. You know, I came from England, and I'm so thankful I escaped the British. All right, so I'm okay with that, and I'm fine about eating good food. But the average Thanksgiving meal, guess how many calories are eaten? Average Thanksgiving meal for an adult, 3,500 calories. Now, 3,500 calories is what you need to put on 1 extra pound of weight, right? And that's in one meal. Okay, so be careful about eating too much, okay? Okay, there are contaminants even in the air. I mentioned mold. There's also formaldehyde. There's about 100,000 chemicals we're exposed to in America that have been released, and many of which we don't know how toxic they are. And some of these chemicals promote inflammation and autoimmune problems. Heavy metals is another thing, and I'm not talking about rock music. Heavy metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, aluminum. Chances are, if all of you had a blood test here, I would, not that I'm a betting man, but if I was, I would put money that over 90% of you have high levels of heavy metals. And it doesn't come by necessarily putting them in your body, like having fillings and things like this, but it's often found in the foods that we're eating, even in the water that we're drinking. All right. It's amazing. Canned food, for example. You have canned food, you're going to have high amounts of aluminum from the cans. You put some cilantro and chlorella. Yes, cilantro, chlorella, excellent for that. Okay. All right, boy, we're going to open a can of worms if I talk about this one, but this is, look, doctors often, people don't realize that a lot of the money that they get is basically from drug companies. And drug companies are the largest institutions in the world, as financial institutions. All right, they're not considered a bank, but they make more money than virtually any other institution on the planet. And so they want to, when you go to the doctor, they have handouts. They get kickbacks every time they inject you with something, right? So, just be careful. Be careful, because these things can stimulate autoimmune reaction. Okay, for example, like to have aluminum. Aluminum is common adjuvant that's found in these immunizations. And when it goes in the body, that adjuvant stimulates an overreaction of the immune system. Okay, a bit much like what we're seeing with autoimmune diseases. So it can set you up for a knee-jerk reaction with the immune system. And you think, well, that just will go away in a few days. No. It can set you up for years to increase that risk of that autoimmune, the autoimmune diseases kicking in. Maybe it won't happen straight away. Maybe it will take years before that is developed. But many of these will trigger autoimmune responses. And then we have chemicals in work environment, head dyes, all kinds of things. I remember years ago, before I was married, my hair was starting to go gray, and I thought, I didn't like this. So I went into one of these big supermarkets, and I thought, let me check out some hair dye. So I went over there and found one, and then it said, just put your hands in these gloves, and then you put those gloves in another set of gloves before you put it on your hair. I'm like, I've got to wear gloves to protect me in another set of gloves to protect me from this stuff that's going directly on my skin. Okay, she'll have to be content with my gray hair. Okay, so a lot of the dyes you find in the store, hair dyes, cosmetics, skincare products, shampoos, all kinds of perfumes and everything, they have a lot of these chemicals, and you'll find that in virtually every case they're hormonal disruptors, and they also suppress the central nervous system. So, again, a lot of these things, they don't hit us straight away. It's just accumulation over the years. It develops, right? Because the body has a lot of resistance to be able to get these things out of the system. And that's why, people don't die instantly when they have a smoke, right? If you injected that nicotine directly in the bloodstream, they'll die within 10 minutes. But if you put it through the lungs, and the lungs sort of help to clear it out of the system, you can go for years taking that nicotine. So the body has incredible resistance. I mean, just the liver alone, you can destroy up to 90% of the liver and it can grow back. It's an incredibly robust organ. But you keep doing that, things will happen, right? All right, so I'm going to have to, I'll try to wind up in the next minute here. All right, I just want to leave us, the remedies are always the same. The remedies are always the same, right? Get enough sunlight, get enough water, get enough exercise, get proper sleep, get on a good schedule, have time during the week where you can have a break, right? Plant-based diet, high in antioxidants, right? This is, boy, sorry about this. I've got to look at this. This was a study done in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, showed the lowest inflammation diet you can have is on the right. Whole grains, fruit, nuts, green, leafy vegetables, right? That's the diet that's going to protect you. All right, so in the end, you go back to the beginning. Fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, really helpful for autoimmune diseases. Okay? Avoid heavy metals, we looked at that. Whole grains for whole people. Okay, lemon juice. Okay, soy protein. Okay, reduces risk of autoimmune inflammatory disease by 60% compared to diet high in animal protein. All right, so can we have maybe 5 minutes for questions? Is that okay? Yeah. All right. Anyone got a question? Yes.
Tell me about this, there's a big rage about doing a sourdough starter.
Sourdough starter, yes.
Sourdough is something that's fermenting, right?
Right.
Is that sourdough bread is not really a great thing to eat?
In my opinion, it's not the best to eat. No. Sourdough. And yes. Even after the baking process. After the baking process. Well, what have you done to make it sour? You've used fermentation, right? Okay. Now that stays in the bread. It's not like yeast. When you use yeast, you can kill yeast by heat. But one of the side effects of that is, you've got gas. That's why you leave the bread. It's best to leave the bread for a day or so for the gas to escape, right? But with sour, the sourness goes all the way through, and that affects digestion. That affects the immune system. That gives it a heaviness that is hard to digest. I know a lot of people advocate it, saying it's really good for you, and Anyway, I'll tell you more about it. Talk to me personally because I have some more information that maybe be better to communicate with you individually. Yes, Ramon.
Yeah, so I have a friend, he lives here.
Yes.
In this community. I spoke to him last week. He has, I think they call it non-alcoholic cirrhosis.
Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease,
fatty
yes.
liver, yeah.
Yes.
And you spoke about that a little bit in your presentation. What are the best ways to deal with that? Is that because of inflammation?
Yeah, I gave a talk on this. So over 100 million Americans have fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. If you're overweight, you have a 75% chance that you have it. Okay, so what causes it? Mostly diet causes it. Okay, there are some microbes that can cause it. There are, hepatitis C and B, and there's also other viruses, even bacteria that could set us up for it. But for the most part, it's through the food that we're taking. And one of the foods I mentioned before was high fructose corn syrup. That is a strong connection with fatty liver. Very strong connection. Also, refined carbs, right? Refined carbs, they end up being processed by the liver, but then they're stored, okay? Because the body can only, take so much carbohydrates before it converts it to fat. So the liver is involved in that process. So also refined oils can increase your chances of, it's going to take years. It's not something that happens overnight. Refined sugars, flours, things like eating a lot of white pastas and white bread and, white rice and just eating excess that your body can't use. That's why 75% of people who are overweight, they have a fatty liver.
It can be reversed.
It can be reversed. Absolutely.
No.
Well, you got to stop the cause. Stop the cause, right? That's a problem. This is the big problem. We're not telling people what caused it. We're just saying take this pill. We'll remove your liver. We'll take your gallbladder out. Whatever we need to do to get this symptom taken care of. But every disease has a cause.